The silence at Althorp House has always felt different. Not empty, not peaceful, heavy. The kind of silence that seems to hold its breath. The kind that remembers everything. For more than 5 centuries, Althorp has stood as the ancestral heart of the Spencer family, an estate layered with history, grief, privilege, and memory. But in the modern world, it became known for something far more personal. It became the resting place of Princess Diana. And in early 2026, according to royal insiders and media speculation, that silence was broken, not by paparazzi helicopters circling overhead, not by a palace leak, but by a single decision from one man, Charles Spencer, a man who has spent nearly 3 decades protecting his sister's legacy from the outside world, a man who rarely speaks unless he feels he absolutely must. And this time, he reportedly decided he had no choice. The issue wasn't a newspaper interview. It wasn't a royal biography. It was something bigger. A proposed media project tied to the approaching 30th anniversary of Diana's death in 2027. A project insiders claim was being positioned as one of the most emotionally powerful royal documentaries ever made. But Charles Spencer allegedly saw something else. Not remembrance, not tribute, not healing. He saw commercialization. He saw his sister's life being transformed into content. And he saw her memory becoming a business strategy. For years, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have remained tied to Diana's legacy in the public imagination. It's understandable. Harry is Diana's son. His grief has shaped much of his public life, and many of the Sussex's biggest media moments, from interviews to documentaries to speeches, have carried echoes of Diana's story, her pain, her relationship with the press, her struggle inside the institution, her emotional honesty. But according to critics, those echoes eventually became something more deliberate. Something strategic. By 2026, royal commentators say Diana's memory had become inseparable from the Sussex brand itself. It wasn't just family history anymore, it was branding. And that's where the conflict reportedly began. Sources close to the situation claim streaming executives were eager to build a large-scale project around Diana's legacy ahead of the 2027 anniversary. The pitch was powerful on paper. Exclusive footage, rare archival material, private reflections, a modern emotional perspective from Harry himself, and perhaps most importantly, access to Althorp. That would have changed everything, because Althorp is more than a location. It is sacred ground. Diana's burial site sits on a secluded island in the middle of the estate lake, shielded by trees, protected by distance, inaccessible to the public. Charles Spencer controls that access. And with it, he controls something even more valuable: authenticity. Without Althorp, a Diana documentary is still a documentary. With Althorp, it becomes an event, a historical moment, a global media phenomenon. That's why insiders say gaining Spencer family cooperation was essential. But when Charles Spencer allegedly reviewed the proposal and saw how central Meghan's involvement might be in shaping the emotional narrative, everything stopped. Reports claim his response was immediate, cold, firm, uncompromising, and deeply personal. He reportedly viewed the comparison between Meghan's modern media struggles and Diana's life as deeply inappropriate. To him, Diana wasn't a symbol. She wasn't an archetype. She wasn't branding material. She was his sister. And unlike the public, Charles remembers Diana before the headlines, before the interviews, before the revenge dresses, before the tragedy in Paris. He remembers the girl, the sister running through Althorp's gardens, the young woman overwhelmed by fame, the mother trying to protect her sons. And according to royal observers, he has become increasingly protective over how that woman is remembered, especially after years of documentaries, dramatizations, books, interviews, and recreations. But this time felt different. This time the story was coming from within Diana's own extended family orbit, from Harry, from California, from a billion-dollar media ecosystem built partly on royal access. And that, according to analysts, changed everything. The refusal was reportedly more than a no. It was a line in the sand, a declaration that Diana's private life would not become a content package, that her grief would not become streaming material, that Althorp would remain closed. For Harry, the emotional weight of that must have been enormous, because the Spencer family has always represented something unique in his life. Not palace, not institution, not protocol, but blood, memory, mother. When Diana died in 1997, it was Charles Spencer who stood inside Westminster Abbey and delivered one of the most unforgettable eulogies in royal history. He publicly promised to protect Diana's sons, to ensure they would remain connected to the emotional world she valued so deeply. That promise mattered. And now, nearly 30 years later, some insiders believe Charles sees this moment as another form of protection. Not protecting Diana from the monarchy, but protecting Diana from modern celebrity machinery, and maybe protecting Harry from becoming consumed by it. The fallout, according to commentators, has sent ripples far beyond Althorp's gates. Because this wasn't just about one documentary, it was about legitimacy, about who gets to tell Diana's story, who owns the memory, who shapes the legacy. The monarchy has its version. Historians have theirs. The media has created dozens. But the Spencer family still holds something no one else can manufacture. The original archive, the private memories, the handwritten letters, the unseen footage, the untold details, and Charles Spencer appears unwilling to surrender those to anyone, even his own nephew, especially if he believes the purpose is commercial. As whispers spread through London and Los Angeles alike, people began asking the same question. If Althorp says no, what happens next? Can the Sussexes tell Diana's story without the place where she rests? Without the family that raised her? Without the private material that gives any such project credibility? Or does the entire concept collapse without the keys to Althorp? That question is now hanging over everything. Because if Charles Spencer has truly shut the gates, he hasn't just denied access to an estate, he may have denied access to the final untouchable chapter of Diana's story. And for Harry and Meghan, that could change everything. The gates are closed, the archives remain private, and the silence at Althorp has never felt louder. If Chapter 1 began with a gate closing, Chapter 2 begins with a question. Who gets to define Princess Diana now? For nearly 3 decades after her death, Diana has remained one of the most recognizable women on earth. Her image never faded, it evolved. To some, she is still the shy kindergarten assistant who became the Princess of Wales overnight. To others, she is the humanitarian icon walking through minefields in Angola. To others, she is the woman betrayed by the institution she married into. And to millions more, she is simply the people's princess. But memory is powerful, and public memory is even more powerful. And in the modern celebrity age, memory can become currency. That is where the tensions surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have become especially complicated. From the beginning of Harry and Meghan's relationship, Diana's presence was felt everywhere. Harry himself often spoke about his mother openly, sometimes emotionally, sometimes politically, always personally. He has repeatedly described Meghan as someone his mother would have understood, someone she may even have welcomed. At first, many saw this as deeply human, natural, a grieving son trying to connect the past to the present. But over time, critics began to argue that Diana's memory wasn't simply being remembered, it was being invoked, repeatedly, and publicly. Royal watchers began pointing to moments that felt symbolic. Jewelry once associated with Diana appearing at major public appearances. Language around media persecution echoing Diana's own interviews. References to emotional isolation inside the institution. Themes of mental health neglect, themes of being silenced, themes of press hostility. To supporters, these were genuine parallels. To critics, they became a deliberate narrative structure. And nowhere was that more visible than after the 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey. That interview became one of the defining media moments of the decade. Millions watched, millions debated. And almost immediately, comparisons to Diana's 1995 Panorama interview emerged. Not because the words were identical, but because the emotional architecture felt familiar. A woman speaking publicly about suffering inside a powerful institution, a husband beside her, a worldwide audience. Pain turned into testimony, and testimony turned into global headline news. Whether intentional or not, Diana's shadow was impossible to ignore. For Charles Spencer, according to many commentators, that may have become increasingly difficult to watch. Because unlike the public, he remembers what that media exposure cost Diana. He remembers the emotional fallout after the interviews, the exhaustion, the paranoia, the relentless scrutiny, the manipulation that later investigations would reveal around the Panorama interview itself, and perhaps most painfully, the way her private suffering became public entertainment. That context matters. Because when Charles allegedly rejected any involvement in a modern retelling of Diana's story, many saw it not as a simple refusal, but as a response to years of accumulated discomfort. Not one project, years. Years of watching Diana's story interpreted, repackaged, adapted, dramatized, monetized. Years of seeing her face on magazine covers, in documentaries, in reenactments, in endless royal retrospectives. and perhaps in recent years seeing her name increasingly connected to the Sussex media identity itself. Royal historians often say something important about Diana. Everyone feels like they know her, but very few people actually did. That includes the media. That includes the monarchy. And maybe Charles Spencer believes that even includes modern storytellers trying to place themselves inside her emotional legacy. Because Diana's life was more than victimhood, more than glamour, more than betrayal. She was contradictory, funny, complicated, impulsive, warm, lonely, brilliant with people, deeply insecure, emotionally intuitive, and often overwhelmed. Reducing her to a single symbolic narrative has always felt incomplete, which is why Althorp matters so much. Althorp holds not the myth, but the fragments of the person, the photographs never published, the family notes, the childhood memories, the private history. And according to observers, Charles has spent decades protecting those fragments from becoming spectacle. That's why this latest refusal feels bigger than Hollywood, bigger than Netflix, bigger than Harry and Meghan. It feels like a fight over ownership. Who owns Diana's image? The monarchy? The public? Her sons? Her brother? Or no one at all? For Harry, the answer may feel deeply personal. Diana is his mother. Her absence shaped him. Her death shaped him. Her memory continues to shape the way the world sees him. And because of that, many believe he feels a moral right to speak about her, to tell stories, to draw parallels, to preserve her voice in ways he chooses. But Charles Spencer may see a distinction between remembrance and commercialization, between tribute and adaptation, between honoring and using, and that distinction may be where the fracture sits. Because once memory becomes content, it stops belonging only to the family. It becomes product, and products get marketed, sold, packaged, promoted, reviewed, consumed. That's the line critics believe Charles refused to cross. Even if the request came from Harry himself, even if the intention was respectful, even if the audience would have been global, especially because of that. By mid-2026, insiders claimed the disagreement had become symbolic of something much deeper. A collision between aristocratic memory and modern celebrity storytelling. One protects silence, the other depends on visibility. One protects privacy, the other survives on audience engagement. One preserves history, the other monetizes access. And caught in the center of it all remains Harry, a son still carrying grief, a husband building a media career, a public figure tied forever to Diana's memory whether he wants to be or not. That contradiction may be impossible to resolve. Because every time Harry speaks about his mother, the world listens. Every time he doesn't, the silence becomes news anyway. And now, with Althorp reportedly closed to this chapter of storytelling, the question becomes even sharper. Can Diana's story still be told authentically without the family's blessing? Or has the most important keeper of that story already answered? For Charles Spencer, the answer appears clear. Some memories are public, some are sacred, and some remain behind locked gates.